Welcome to the Bonhoffer Show with Bill Hull. The show about stuff most people try to avoid, but can't because it controls their lives. Religion, culture, and politics. Why does Bill Hull host this show? Because he and Bonhoeffer hoisted a few brews together in Berlin. Nope. That never happened. Is it that Bonhoeffer's book, The Cost of Discipleship, both challenged and changed Bill as a young man? Well, yes, that is part of it. But it's primarily because Bonhoeffer called us to a costly discipleship. And there has never been a time when such courage has been more absent or desperately needed than now. Bonhoeffer famously said, "Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ." The Bonhoffer Project is committed to turning leaders into disciple makers. Because if leaders fail to create disciple-making movements, then we have failed. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. He's still tall and good-looking. And yes, he is wearing German cologne. He's acquired a few more underlying conditions. But direct from his underground bunker in Long Beach, California, the man who once told Don Henley, "You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave," Bill Hull.
Welcome, everyone, to another Bonhoeffer Show. We're still looking for Diedrich. Herr Bonhoeffer was last seen on Santa Monica Boulevard. Pray for him. All right, here we go. Today, our subject is the medium is the message. If you've ever taken a communications course, you have heard that. And Canadian communication theorist Marshall McLuhan coined the phrase, "the medium is the message," in his famous book, which I have not read, The Extensions of Man in 1964, when I was in high school. It has now become part of communication folklore. His original meaning had to do with whether a message was delivered in print, visually, musically, or through some art form. The medium would determine how the message would be perceived. I guess it'd be sort of like a proposal for marriage. It could be a poem, it could be with flowers, it could be with background music, or as my wife will tell you, I asked her to marry me in the glow of the lights coming out from the potato chip machine in the girls' dorm in Tulsa, Oklahoma at our little college. And it was the best I could do. You know, I had no money, I had no ring. It was just the best I could do at the moment. And she said, "I'll think about it." And after 52 years, she's still thinking about it. And I'm waiting for her answer. Okay. The medium does determine how a message will be perceived. Everyday example. You're walking through a store during Christmas season and Christmas music is being played. And I remember we used to go to the store just to listen to the Christmas music and look at the decorations. Boy, I wonder what that's like. I haven't done that in a while now, but it puts you in a mood, a good mood. It created an emotion of joy and desire while people are shopping. You know, he says, "Okay, now I want to buy things for my friends and my family." And now if Joy to the World was playing in your favorite department store and it was July, you go, "Wait a minute. What's the problem here? Did somebody hit the wrong button?" You might be kind of aggravated by that. But the calendar or context was an important part of that medium. A poem about love can reach a person quite powerfully that logical explanation or a clinical approach could not. One could even say McClellan's statement could be stripped of its eruditeness and rewritten to say, "The method is the message." Now, my interest in this matter goes to another highly respected writer and thought leader, Dr. Robert Coleman, and his little masterpiece, The Master Plan of Evangelism. The book has sold over 7 million copies. It was Billy Graham's favorite for a long time, and he used to offer it on his crusades. And it was written in 1963. And on page 21 of that book, under the chapter title Selection, a little phrase was used that reveals the secret sauce that Jesus used to spread his message. And that is, people were his method. And I would adjust it a bit more and say people were his medium and therefore the message. Now, before I distort this phrase any further than I have already, let me try to explain that there's a number of ways to make disciples. And there's all kinds of mediums that are available to us now. But nothing replaces a person. And then this is really fundamental to taking the exploitation out of making disciples, to take all the glitz out of making disciples, and to take all the programming and advertisements and slick advertising out of making disciples. And all those things come our way, especially from people like us, people who say, hey, look what we have. You ought to get involved. So I was reading an article this morning in the Wall Street Journal about the growth of Netflix, Amazon, Prime Video, Hulu, Apple TV, and other media companies during the 2020 pandemic. And there has been an explosion in this industry that has created by a nation stuck at home. And these companies have gotten richer and hotter and bigger, and the poor have been gotten poorer, but at least they've been entertained. The message is that the new and most widespread medium is on-demand movies and entertainment. That's really what this chart showed in the Wall Street Journal. And the temptation is to conclude, if we want to reach the world, then we must invest more time and energy in the media over the internet. The conclusion, even though superficial, has some merit on some level. Religion via the media over the last 50 years, however, has, I believe, been a net loss. I'm not saying that there aren't good programs. What I am saying is that most of them have not been good, and they've been bland or poorly produced or cliche-ridden presentations, and it brings out, fame or the search for fame, and selfish ambition has brought out all the pathology and the bizarre displays of religious hubris that has turned the Christian faith into a circus without a tent. Yes, millions can be reached, but with what? And for what purpose? So if you have 1 million people show up on some large field or some plain somewhere on planet Earth, and you say, well, that's success. Well, it's success in getting a crowd, but the question is, have we overrated crowds? Have we overrated these kinds of things? And what, in effect, has really been happening? And in a moment, we're going to talk about some research that shows that with all the programming and all the glitz and all the entertainment that the church has tried to provide through the media, what have we communicated with this medium? What is it that most people think about when they think about the church, based on the medium that we've tried to use? All right? So let's take a break and listen to Steve Stemmons tell us about all the good stuff that we at the Bonhoffer Project have for you, and how you can get involved with us. And so we'll let Steve do that because he's got the great voice for it. And then we'll come back to you and I'll introduce my guest.
We turn leaders into disciple makers. That's the mission of the Bonhoffer Project. But before we can turn you into a disciple-making leader, we need you to be in a cohort. A cohort is a 1-year, 10-meeting, book reading, pray, wrestling, writing, planning challenge that has the potential to change you and thus redirect your life. Interested? Here's the process. Go to our website, thebonhofferproject.com, and complete the application form. We will contact you. We will then help you select the type of cohort that's best for you. In person, online, or online school, which is asynchronous, so it's not affected by time zones and anyone in the world can access it. Oh, and training is now also available in Spanish. In the meantime, subscribe to the show, read one of Bill's books, and send us a question you want Bill or some member of the Bonhoeffer team to answer. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm once again have the privilege of having with me two guest hosts. Cindy Perkins, our executive director in the Bonhoffer Project. Cindy is also a professor at Trinity University in Florida. Also is one of the best spokespersons and teachers that we have in our group called the Bonhoffer Project faculty. Along with her is Dr. Jim Thomas, lead pastor at First Baptist Church in Fayetteville, Georgia. He's director of training. He's been with us a number of years and has helped us with all kinds of production of materials and writing and so on. And so we welcome both of you today. And so you've heard me talk about this problem. The medium is the message, that reality, and that the people are the method that Jesus used. And recent research by the Barna Group cited a steep decline in American population identifying as Christian. They report that in the last decade, this very last decade, that those identifying as Christian declined from 50% of the population to 25% of the population. Now, that on its face seems a serious and alarming fall from grace for America. Competing pollsters may discover reasons to be critical of this finding, but in general, this should tell us something quite clearly. If the medium is the message, that the medium is primarily the media itself, the campaign has been an abysmal failure. So why, if first of all, we'll start with you, Cindy. Do you believe that these findings are accurate? If not, why not? And then how would you analyze this finding?
Well, I do think they're probably really close to accurate. I mean, you can obviously in any poll, you can ask questions a certain way and get certain answers. But in my own unofficial polls, as I talk to people and engage with people, I mean, I work at a Christian college, and some of the things that I hear tell me that this is absolutely truth. And so I think what we have to realize is that perception is reality for most people, whether it's truth or not truth. And so how we speak the truth and how we engage them matters in that place. What we say, how we say it, where we say it. I think we have to come back to that place of 3D people and sit with people. It's difficult. It's time consuming. It's all of those things. I know we've had a couple of deaths recently, and we talked even about that old Jewish custom of sitting Shavah, just sitting in the presence of people, in the presence of God. And so we don't know how to do that. Life moves too fast. The media, I believe what the standard is less than 4 seconds, and some places less than a second that you see that video image. And so life moves so fast that we're not spending time in the slow things of life. And so we've not taught people how to be in the place where God can speak into their lives, right? And so they're just seeing God. I think about the 20-somethings because I deal with them on a regular basis, and they're just seeing Christianity and God as the alternative to whatever, right? And so we've not given them the opportunity to say, wait a minute, there's something very valuable in this place. And I think that life on life place that happens in discipleship is where that comes in. So because the church hasn't been actively involved in discipleship, we're not producing people who would call themselves disciples of Christ.
Okay, so there's somehow when they're being deployed into the culture, that they're not really salt and light.
No, they don't have what it takes, right? We've not given them that foundational underpinning to be able to say what that means, because they spend more time on in their video games and watching TV shows and those kind of things than they ever spend sitting with the things of God that need to be thought through deeply. We don't have a generation coming up, and it's a big generation, and they're not coming up with that foundational understanding of who Christ is. And so therefore they're not going to identify as Christians. Barna did another research project a couple of years ago, and they call themselves the Nuns, N-O-N-E, none. I have no religious affiliation. They're spiritual in their thought processes, but they don't want to be associated with Christianity because what we've given to them has been false. It's been masked with what we want it to be masked with, rather than the foundational underpinning of what real discipleship is.
Dr. Thomas, or JT, as
Yes,
we
sir.
like to say,
Yes,
how do you read this?
Well, I would first of all, and I've read a lot of Barner studies. I'd like to see how they define Christian. That would be one thing I would want to see. So are you talking evangelical? Are you talking mainline? Are you talking people who just claim to be Christians, or people who are actively attending a religious organization, if you will? So, I mean, that tempers some of the
I think it's people who identify themselves as Christian, and sometimes a churchgoer is somebody who's been to church in the last 6 months.
Right.
So, yeah, it's pretty low bar. That's so low you can't even see it,
That's exactly right. It's like breathing. You've said that in another podcast. It's like, that's our bar, breathing, and we'll count them. And they say they're a Christian. Well, so I have a little issue with that as far as the parameters of that go, to say that we've declined that much from people who identify versus people who are actively at least engaging in a religious organization, a church somewhere. So that would be one thing I would just question about it. But the other thing is this. Yeah, obviously, when we're talking about technology, I'll just attack this from a non-Christian standpoint. We have a local international company. They're well known. They have a local manufacturing plant near here where we live. And they actually go into high schools and recruit right out of high schools, because some of these kids are just phenomenal with computer work and with design and with all these things. And they've done that, and they've hired kids as interns and as other things. And just here a year or two ago, they had to go back into the local high schools to the guidance counselors and said, these kids are phenomenal in the computer and digital aspects of everything we're asking them to do, but they don't know how to have a conversation with another human being. Y'all need to do stuff within the high schools to teach them interpersonal skills, because ultimately they're going to have to relate to other people, not just online. And I think that was a great just example locally for us of, we need to continue to foster one-on-one discipleship, small group discipleship, interaction between people, and not discount digital media, because ultimately technology is just a tool, right? I mean, and what you do with it dictates good or evil. So the intent of the heart, really, technology in itself is amoral, right? So you have a fork, you can use it to eat lunch or stab someone in the eye, but the fork didn't do that, right? You did that. And so the idea here was, say, digital technology. Should ministry happen on digital technology? Well, sure it can. But if we get stuck to the medium over the message, then we're in a tough spot. And we've seen it with Zoom fatigue in 2020. I've seen people come back to church, and when we open back up here on Father's Day for some socially distanced worship services, and just being in the same room with other living human beings that are not in their house almost brought physical relief to them after being separated for like 3 months at that point, right? And that's the conversations we're having. I can't wait till I can hug someone again. I can't wait till I can have a big meal with our church family again. There is that and these are people who have watched us online, done small groups online, done D groups online. But there's something about that physical relationship with somebody else, that one-on-one relationship that is central to disciple making.
Well, should Christians get off of media and just do personal work, or how should we use the media? I mean, how can we find a balance?
I don't think they should. Again, if we see technology as a tool, then let's leverage that for the sake of the kingdom of God. The technology isn't the end; it's just the means. And one example from us is we did an international online mission trip this year. Now, I've never heard of such a thing, or even thought of such a thing. We had a partner pastor in Brazil who had that vision, and we ended up seeing a little over 350 people in Brazil come to Christ as a result of an online international mission trip. And the farthest our people had to go was to their computer. And, there's a whole strategy and a structure behind all of that, obviously, but that's leveraging technology when we can't get on an airplane to continue the work of the Great Commission. And so now we're working with those pastors and challenging them toward discipling these new believers and so on and so forth. But no, I don't think we need to give it up, but I think we need to put it in its proper place.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we have to be careful that does not become the norm for us, that we use that as a tool. I know I read a couple of years ago, I read Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. And in that book, he did the research on what happens when you get Facebook likes and those kind of things, because we have a lot of folks who live in that space, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same as taking a drug. The dopamine that is released into your system when you have the hit and have the like and somebody shares or those kind of things, then create within us even a negative chemical reaction in that place. So I think it's a matter of education. I think we educate our people into how to adequately and properly utilize social media, but we also help them to understand that you cannot believe everything that you see that Facebook rolls across, right? Because if so, then they just wind up in this place of confusion and chaos and turmoil in their spirit. And so part of that is we say, yes, we use this, but there is nothing that substitutes for going back to the Word of God. And there is nothing that substitutes for sitting in the presence of God's people, studying God's Word and allowing the Spirit to just move in that space. So we have to, and if we haven't trained them, this is the piece that I'm like, if we haven't trained them how to do that, then when we hit these places like we are now with COVID, where we can't go and do, now they don't know what to do and how to engage that piece, right? They don't know how to engage that well and keep that flowing in the space where it needs to be.
Okay, a friend of ours, Daniel Grissom, we all know, he said if the church could have solved their problem on their own, they would have. Now, that statement really speaks to what the church's problem is and then how can they fix it. So I want to ask both of you this question, starting with you, Cindy. What is the church's problem and how can they fix it?
Well, I think there's a couple of problems that the church in general has. Number one, our definition of success is wrong. I think we have picked up the world's definition of success. We have landed in that space where we have used buildings and numbers and those things to measure success. And success needs to be measured by transformed lives for us. And that's a little harder to measure, to identify. Sometimes it's more difficult. So I think that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is, like we discussed before, I think that we've become soft and we aren't willing to do the hard thing. Discipleship takes time and energy and heartache, because the reality is if I disciple 10 people over the course of 5 years, statistically, probably 2 of those are going to drop off and they may not do the thing that my prayer and my hope is for them to do. And so that makes me sad. And that makes me, if I'm tied up in the numbers, then I am feeling like a failure or inadequate or less than. And so we have to come back to that place where we see Christ and understand that this is a process, a long process, and there are no guarantees. We do the thing that we're supposed to do. So those are the two things that I see that the church has missed it. How do they fix it? Discipleship. I think it comes down to the point where the leader, because everything rises and falls on leadership. I do believe that in any organization, as an organizational leadership professor, I see that over and over in every case study that we do. Where the leader is, that's where your people will come to. And so the leader has to be intentional to put himself or herself in a place where they can be discipled, where they can have somebody who's building into them, and we're always learning and always growing and always becoming more like Christ. And then we have to be willing to take the time to take those half dozen or dozen people. Jesus took 12. I don't take ever more than 12. Because I'm not anywhere close to him. So I like to back that up a little bit so I can actually manage it, make it happen. But we have to be willing to get into the mess of life, because that's what discipleship is life on life. It's not just Bible study. Bible study is a component, but it's life on life. How do I help you live more like Jesus? And so we got to be willing to go there.
Okay, JT.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those things wholeheartedly. And the other thing I would add is I would go back upstream and say, just one of the basics in the Bonhoffer Project that we talk about is that the gospel you proclaim will determine the disciples that you make. And if we're proclaiming a gospel that gets people to a starting line and doesn't lead them into a life of the kingdom, then we're missing it. And I think there are a lot of churches that get their people to the starting line and have no idea what to do with them. And then they exist for however long they exist and die or move on or get disenfranchised or create their own agendas or whatever. But I think when we start to proclaim a gospel that includes discipleship, because that's what Jesus did, then we start to change the paradigm of where we go. It gives us constant purpose. The purpose then never goes away. We don't have to create anything new. We just do what Jesus did. And of course, when you look at method and medium and all those type of things, there are contemporary ways to be able to accomplish that. But then we go back to the mission always trumping again, that we go back to this idea that we are to follow Jesus as our king. And if that's the case, then we've created a paradigm through the gospel that we're proclaiming that changes how we do church. And then pandemics don't mess with that. Social unrest doesn't mess with that. Political mess doesn't mess with that, because we're about a kingdom agenda that's over and above all of those things. So I think that gospel piece is critical of what the church is missing right now and how we fix what's going on.
A few years ago, I don't know how many now, it could be as long as 10 years, I spoke at the chapel service of my seminary, the seminary I graduated from. And I looked around the room and I saw that I was probably older than most of the faculty and all of the students. And now I teach there, part-time adjunct. But I concluded, after 35 years, I think I'd been gone from the seminary at that time. I said, I have a question I bring back to you at the seminary. Why do we keep trying to reach the world without making disciples? And I said, that's my wisdom for you after 35 years of being on the field. I'm reporting back in. And I think that what I saw was, and what I presented to them was that our gospel was really teaching that you could become a Christian and not follow Jesus.
Right.
And if you teach that, and if that becomes basically the backbone of your whole message and who you are, then what do you expect you're going to create? You're going to create people who think that being a follower of Jesus is optional. Like, I can go to heaven without any of that stuff. And it's just about the forgiveness of my sins, which, Jim, you mentioned earlier. Also, that we have to be clear on what it is we're doing, and then how to do it, and who we are.
Well, and it
in
keeps
doing
us
it.
away from chasing the silver bullet as leaders.
Yeah. Mhm.
We keep the next program, the next emphasis, the next curriculum. It keeps us from those. Simply, again, back to technology, become tools that lead us to a prescribed end. And so when we start with the kingdom gospel, this idea of making disciples as part of the gospel itself, then everything else simply becomes a method or a means to get us to that end. And that sure does help us as leaders as well.
I said that one of the statements I wrote was, these people are the method, and these are disciples that are fully engaged in the mission of God in the world. And, you know, we talk about make disciples, but disciples aren't made unless the people that we make a disciple of are also making other disciples. Then that disciple isn't made till they reproduce. It would be like the human race. You know, if your children never had children and no one's children ever had children, then we'd all die off, right? And so we know that, however, that the church has lasted 2,000 years, and there's over 2.5 billion Christians in the world, or people who identify as Christians. And so, you know, we have made significant progress. But people are the method, and the message is that when people say, "Where is God?" I think the answer is that he is sitting beside you in the form of a person who is one of his followers. And I hope that that's the way it is. Now we're going to take a break right now and come back, and we're going to talk about briefly the best and the worst of the week for you. Okay, I'm going to ask my guest host what the best and worst of the week has been, or anything like that they'd like to talk about that's fun and different. And so let's take a break, listen to Steve Simmons. We'll be right back.
If you want to expand the disciple-making movement, then share the show with your friends and colleagues. Hey, it's easy to subscribe. Simply go to iTunes or to our website, thebonhofferproject.com. Then click on The Bonhoeffer Show. Once you do, we will keep you updated with the Bonhoffer Project's events, new materials and books, as well as the larger disciple-making movement current news. You can also access previous programs. And be sure to read Bill's weekly column, which is posted on the website. Remember, ask questions. Bill's answers are guaranteed to give you herd immunity, increase your IQ, and cause you to experience waves of euphoria. Well, not really, but his answers are really good. And now, let's get back to the Bonhoeffer Show.
Welcome back, everyone. And we're going to end with, am I asking my spectacular co-host, guest host this past few weeks, what the best and worst of the week is. And remember that when we started today, it's 4 weeks later. So just remind you of that. Let's start with you, Jim. What is the best and worst of the last week or month, if you like?
Sure. Yeah, I think the best for me is, it's personal, but having my daughter home from college over the break, and to be able to spend that quality time.
That was her worst, right?
Yeah. That was her worst, but our best. And we're like, we're going to miss you. And she's like, see ya.
Yeah.
No, and just to be able to spend time with her, to worship with her, to do the holidays with her, and the first part of 2021 was a blessing for us. And we're starting to see those times as more precious as she's become a young adult now. So that was the best for me. Worst for me is just some close friends, both here in our church and in other areas of the country, who've been hit so hard with COVID, who are on ventilators, in hospitals. Nothing we can do but pray, which is a lot to do, honestly. But living on pins and needles to see how they're improving, if they're improving, and then losing some along the way. That's been the worst for me.
All right. Cindy.
So I'm going to start with the worst because I like to finish with the good. So my worst, like JT, has been those who have been hit hard with COVID and just how it has dismantled our society and the hearts of people. And we have prayed. One day last week, I realized that I was praying specifically for 19 people I knew who had COVID. And we lost one, and that was really sad and hard because he was a young man. And so just the toll that's taking, but knowing that that God is still God and still in control, right? So, but the best for me over the holiday, we got to go visit my mother-in-law who turned 92 on Christmas Eve. And so she had fallen and broken her hip a couple of months before that for the second time, climbing on a ladder, the same ladder. We've taken away her ladder privileges. But but just getting to see her and watch her healing in the process. We told her she's been practicing for COVID for the last 15 years because she's been living alone without driving and just that isolation. But just seeing how, because of her faith in God, she has just managed well, and knowing that she's going up and down the stairs already and looking forward to the day when she can climb on the chair and the ladder again. So I'm like, stop, please. But and she lives in West Virginia where it's cold and snowy, and still just goes outside and down the stairs to do her laundry. So just being able to spend time with her was really, really kind of the best.
Well, it's wonderful to have a perspective of God's sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a big word. It can mean different things to different people. But I've often likened it to having a yard that's fenced in. Mm-hmm. And out in the yard, there's playground equipment and variety of experiences, and you let the children go out in the yard and play. And a lot of stuff happens out there within the fences, but one thing is they can get hurt and they can get in fights and lots of stuff can go negative, but also a lot of pleasure, wonderful things can happen, but nobody gets to go over the fence. I know that's an inadequate illustration. They all are. But I believe God's got it all fenced in. So that's where that's my best, and that's my solace and comfort in the isolation of this year. And it's going to go on a few more months probably, even though I hope that our country is able to be together to find some common ground. But be that as it may, I want make sure that God's will is done in my life, in my family's life, and in the lives of those I care about. And so it's with that optimism that I enter 2021. And so thank you, Cindy and Jim, for being my guest hosts these last several weeks. And also remember, ladies and gentlemen, that the best advice I can give you, my elevator gospel, is follow Jesus and he'll teach you everything you'll ever need to know.
Well, we hope that the show wasn't too bad. Jane Hull wants everyone to know that if anything Bill said was offensive, she feels your pain. If you were upset by anything Bill and his guests said, well, mission accomplished. At the Bonhoffer Show, we value irreverent, satirical, and generally inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission, we don't mess around. Remember, subscribe. We promise. No private jets, no white suits, and definitely no toupees.